there, how you doing, good people? Nigel Streeter here, and I'm here with my good friend Robin Harris. If you didn't get to see the first podcast, this is podcast number 2 in our series, the Positive Progress Podcast. What do you think of that? PPP. And this is talking about her approach and my approach being slightly different in relation to how we try to help people to make their well-being as positive as possible, or at least in their own special circumstances. So in the last one, we talked about something that I put forward, which was creativity is everything. And in this one, Robin is going to do exactly the same. She's going to put an idea forward. And if I can just give you a little bit of a background thing, this was something that she put on to her YouTube channel, I believe, and also onto the website. And I'm not quoting here now because she's going to correct me if I'm wrong. It's something to do with the messy stuff in life. Now, if you didn't see the last one, this came about because of the fact that when I saw this, 2 things happened. First of all, I resolved that I wasn't going to read or find out any more about what she was talking about, because I want to be a part of the audience the same as you are. I want to be able to ask questions and sort of make observations in relation to what she's going to say. And the second one was the fact that I forgot what the second one is now.
Was it that thing about you thought that I was not messy?
Yes, that's what it was. Sorry, I'm almost 40 now. You understand my memory's going. The other one was in relation to the fact that I thought that you were one of the least messy people I'd ever met. To which you, shall we say, enlightened me. That's not the case.
Yeah, very much that. I think looking inwards, maybe I'm not messy, but from the inside, it doesn't look that way.
No.
And I think it's like that swan who's gliding across the surface, looking so serene and graceful, and underneath is paddling frantically. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what it is. But also, I think it's a little bit like the Insta or Facebook view that people see of your world. Because you don't always, even generally, come out with the messy stuff, which is why I wanted to post about it on Facebook. Because the messy stuff is the real stuff. Often we're posting the picture perfect, the stuff that looks good, and it might be from the best of intentions, because as we're doing here, we want to talk about the uplifting stuff. But I think there's the balance to that, the messy side of things, that life isn't always smooth sailing. Life can throw us curveballs, and that can really throw us. And I think if we think just in terms of the Facebook, Instagram picture perfect life, then we're making maybe that comparison and thinking, oh, my life is so messy, there must be something wrong with me. And I wanted to post.
Say that last bit again, sorry.
If we're focusing on the Facebook life that we see from everybody else, the beautiful pictures, the influencers who are all dressed up and made up and hair done, looking perfect. And then I look at my life and think, my life doesn't look anything like that. There must be something wrong with me. I'm not good enough, because a lot of people have that inner sense. And we talked a little bit about this in terms of the creativity, and you brought up that sense of arrogance and whether we can be actually justifiably proud in what we've done and the things that we've created, or are we being like the puffer fish and puffing up and being arrogant because actually inside we're feeling very insecure? And that insecurity can come from having an inner belief of I'm not good enough. So if I'm looking at the beautiful Facebook world and looking at my life and thinking my life looks nothing like that, everybody else is getting their life spot on and I'm not. I'm living in a messy life. Then we can end up beating ourselves up and feeling
worse. Sorry, you there, Robin. Sorry a second. I'm just thinking as you're talking now, do you know they had all these really, really sad things with young girls who were either harming themselves or some committed suicide because of what they saw as being the perfection industry? You know, that they weren't, you know, they were perfectly intelligent, pretty friendly, nice young women, but they were feeling insecure in some way. They were feeling as though their life, as you put it, was messy, and that was a really big contributory factor in relation to the way that they denigrated themselves. Is it that sort of thing as well?
Yes, it can go to those extremes. And also there are groups on Facebook and Instagram which are all about not eating, self-harming, not eating, these different ways that we seek to take control over a life that feels out of control and feels messy. Whereas I want to share the word that life is messy. That's how it is, and that's normal. And that's how it is for pretty much everybody. What you see on the Facebook feed or the Instagram feed is not what those people's lives are actually like. It's a snapshot in time. I look at nature, as we discussed in the last episode. Nature has very much been a part of my journey, a part of my healing, and a part of my inspiration. And if you look at nature, certainly where we live, you've been here, Nigel, we live in the middle of nowhere. And like at this time of the year, when it's been quite wet here in Wales, and yet the temperatures have been reasonably mild. And so everything's just gone ballistic. You can see brambles that seem to have grown 6 foot overnight, and they're there to trip you up in the morning. So it can look very messy. But nature has a purpose, and it's beautiful at the same time. And I watched a movie some years ago now, but I sneak back and watch it again when I can, called The Shack, where there's a scene in that where the guy, the main character, is with another character in a garden. And the other character says to him, "What are you thinking of this garden now?" And he said, "It's still a right mess." And her face just lights up and she says, "Yes, it is. This garden is you. You are perfectly in process." Then it pans back. So where he's sitting right down on the ground, he's so close up to it, all he can see is mess and things climbing over everything else. And it's not neat little borders. So he sees all this mess. But as you pan back, you see that it's a series of spirals.
Yeah.
And then I think it goes further back and it forms a shape of something, all made up of these beautiful, colorful spirals that are all flowers. So we talked last time about color and creativity, and being out in nature and being able to appreciate that, particularly when you've come through something that's been really difficult and then you see all that glorious abundance. So for me, that's really what messy is about. Nature, she looks messy when you're close up, but when you pull back, you can kind of see the beauty and the purpose, which is life for nature. It's growth and expanding outwards, creating new life, and the abundance of color. Nature colors outside of the lines. It looks messy, but it's beautiful. And when we can see life that way, because I'm all about our perspective colors our perception of life and our experience of life. So when we can accept, yeah, it's messy, that's fine. It's still in process, and it's in process with a purpose. It's not just random. So that's okay. I can go with it.
How does this fit in with your view in relation to making things right? Because what you're saying here now is it's almost like, to me, it sounds like a sort of an acceptance of part of the process is this mess. It is this disorganization. It is this stuff which is, at least on the surface, is less than beautiful, less than desirable in some way. How does that fit in with what we talked about in relation to the way that you do your work about making things good, making things organized? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, but that's not what I'm about. I'm not about making things right or good or organized. Because I don't think there is a right or a wrong, a good or a bad. I think it's allowing the messiness, but then choosing which bits of it work for me. So I could go into, like, if you think of The Secret Garden, where the little girl finds the garden and it's all overgrown and it's wild. And she chooses, along with the little boy who comes and helps her dickon, they choose which bits to keep. So we can look at the overall and decide which bits work for us, which bits resonate for us, which bits feel uplifting for us. And we can keep those, we can feed those, and we can nurture those. And the other bits we can not tend to or trim back, because they didn't, in The Secret Garden, they didn't make it all beautiful borders and regimented. They left it wild. So I think in the wildness and the messiness, when we can see the beauty, we can bring that out. And again, that's part of the creativity. It's working with that, not saying that anything is right or wrong, because then when we put those labels on it, it restricts things and it can make us feel uncomfortable, because if that's inside of me, then there's wrong inside of me, versus that's just a part that I don't want to feed because it's not serving me. And Jack Cornfield talks about letting go can be a really difficult concept for some people. Whereas if we just let it be, it'll come and go all by itself. Yeah, I think there is a degree of acceptance, but not acceptance as in, I've got to accept this, but that true just letting be.
How do you do that then? How do you distinguish between this idea of a positive maintenance, if you like, of these things, and just accept them for what they are, right? And exactly what you just did, and you went, oh God, it's those things again, it's causing me problems, well, I got no choice. Because to me, one of those things sounds very positive, and it's like taking a whole load of weight off your shoulders. And again, I talk all the time about this idea of this, exactly what we do in actual fact, in slightly different ways, is to try and help to manage this amount of weight that people carry around, because we all need a certain amount of stress to function. Otherwise, we never go to bed, let alone get out of bed.
We just wouldn't move.
But the thing is, one of those sounds very positive to me, which is the one that you're promoting here now, and the other one, which is extremely negative, which is this, oh God, it's all terrible and awful, but I got no choice. I'm being forced to do this sort of thing. So how do you distinguish between these two things, which the end result is extremely different, but they're very similar in nature?
For me, because this was my journey, and my life now is very different to how it was, but initially it wasn't. And yet the change wasn't instant, but how I felt inside shifted. And then from that, I was able to create the life that I more wanted to be living. And for me, it was that thing that Wayne Dyer said: when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And there's a quote that they're not really sure where it came from when you look it up, but in the Talmud, it says something along the lines of, we don't see things the way they are, we see them the way we are. We can start to look at things and engage with, I talked in the last episode about choosing to engage with certain thoughts or beliefs and choosing not to engage with other ones. We're fostering the ones that uplift us. And how I work with that is by listening to the body, because the body will tell us, that's uplifting me, that isn't. That makes me feel good. It puts me in the zone. You talked about creativity last time, where you can just get into that. I'm just having fun. I'm just playing. It's amazing. And you lose all track of time, and you would do it. It might be a job for you and it might bring you income, but you would do it even if you had to pay to do it, because you just enjoy it so much and you lose all sense of everything and just be in it, be in the flow. When we find those things, like you said, to grasp them with both hands and to feed those and to spend as much time as you can in those. And if you find yourself drifting off, to come back to them. And for me, that's about listening to our true nature. And I read Gabor Mate a lot. He says that our discomfort is an indication that we've drifted away from that true nature. So if there's something that isn't serving us, we feel discomfort. And it's about being conscious and noticing that, and then taking action, because things aren't going to change unless we take action, to support ourselves back into the place where we feel good. Sometimes that's more challenging than others, because sometimes we're in a place where it's very hard to find anything to be happy about. But happiness is actually a choice.
Do you think so?
There's a lot of research to say that it is. And it's like you were saying last time as well about the external gratification versus the internal gratification. And if we are saying, I'll be happy when I have the new house, the new car, the new job, the new partner, we're putting our happiness outside of ourselves versus knowing that my happiness comes from inside. There's a whole program called Happiness for No Reason, or Happy for No Reason. And if you think of like Nelson Mandela, having been in solitary confinement all those years, he had to choose how he was going to view his world and his position in the world. And we can choose to look for joy. Even in the smallest, simplest of things, we talk often about simple, keeping it really, really simple. How can I find joy? And that joy for me now, sometimes I'm in a situation and I'm not liking the situation at all, but I can bring joy in because I'm looking for the silver lining, like you talked about last time as well. I'm learning something from this. The thing itself isn't serving me, but it's giving me greater clarity as to what doesn't serve me and what I want in my life that will serve me. And Abraham Hicks talks about that as a rocket of desire. But unfortunately,
a
rocket of desire.
Okay.
So if something happens that we don't want, or if we're in a situation that we don't want, inside we're thinking, this is horrible, I want X. But most of us spend our time focusing on the this is horrible, this is horrible, this is horrible, rather than the I want X. And I want X is a rocket of desire. It's a cry out to the universe. I don't want any more of this. I want this. But the universe listens to where we put our attention. So if we're focusing on, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, the universe doesn't hear the don't. It just hears the, I'm focusing on this, I'm focusing on this, I'm focusing on this. So it thinks, oh, okay.
That universe. What's that universe like, Robin? Huh?
I know, it just doesn't listen to the negatives. I don't know. We need to give it an education lesson.
Yeah.
But all it hears is you're thinking about this, you're thinking about this, right? Well, if you're spending so much time thinking about that, you must really love it. We'll give you more. And that's how manifestation actually works. And The Secret, the book, The Secret, the film, The Secret. And that's why some people struggle with it, because they're not realizing that the universe is hearing the don't, or rather it's hearing what comes after the don't, not hearing the don't. But if we could just focus on that rocket of desire, I don't want this, I do want this, right? I want this, I want this, I want this, whatever this might be. And to bring all of our senses into that. So if I had, or when I have this, because the universe is bringing it to me, trusting that. And when I have it, it'll feel like this, it'll look like this, it'll sound like this, it'll smell like this, it'll taste like this. And the more time I spend in that, and athletes do this. So we've just had
visualization.
Yeah, we've just had the Olympics.
What do you use just now? Not visualization.
Manifestation.
What did you say? Manifestation. Yeah.
But it's through visualization, imagery, because it's not just visual; it's the whole package, all of our senses. And for example, with the Olympics, I was watching the high jump, and there was a guy that was jumping, and he was clearing the bar by a massive margin. You know, they could have upped it by feet nearly, and he would still probably have been clearing it. But athletes like that, they visualize that. They're not doing anything at the time. They're just, I'm sitting here and I'm seeing myself taking that run with the pole or whatever, if it has a technical name, I don't know. And going up, what does that feel like as I go up through the air, as the spring takes me up, going over that bar, I'm seeing myself clearing it by a clear foot. And then what it feels like to come back down onto the mattress on the floor, the big crash mat, and to stand up and yes, and to hear the crowd roar and to see the score on, or whatever, I don't know. But they go through all of that and they bring in all of those senses. And that is how they get to the point of being able to do it, because they do it here first. They do it internally and then they make it real.
You know, you said, let's go, we're talking about the positives now, right? Which is fine, but let's go back to the messy slightly, because you talk about something called, not disease, dis-ease, right? Which is something different to disease, which I'm taking on board, that is something to do with like a physical manifestation of some sort of issue or problem, right? But you're talking about, explain dis-ease then, because to me, that's in the same ballpark as messy. I might be wrong, but just explain to me what dis-ease is about.
I think they're very closely related. Dis-ease is really a lack of ease. And it can be anything. So it could be a physical condition. It could be discomfort in your head, you know, because you've got a lot of thoughts that are really intrusive and uncomfortable. It could be emotional dis-ease. It could be social dis-ease. It could be behavioral, where you're doing things that aren't serving you and makes you uncomfortable. So dis-ease is anything like that. And it comes from, again, it comes from within. So there's something in our thoughts, beliefs that isn't serving us. And generally, from my learning, that comes from some kind of trauma. And it might not be a big trauma that, you know, we automatically think of, the big car crash or 9/11 or the 7/7 bombings, or you've lost your parent or both parents at a very young age. It doesn't have to be those. Obviously, they can be traumatic, but it can be the little covert cumulative things that build up over time.
I was just going to say, it's exactly what I called, we talked about it before, with the layers on the roof, cumulative trauma rather than one big thing.
And we hear people talk about PTSD. I did some research. I was in a research project. It wasn't my research, but I was involved in a project that was starting off that all of the participants needed to have gone through a PTSD questionnaire and come out as, yes, you have PTSD. But we instantly recognized that was not a term that we wanted to use. For a start, D stands for disorder. It wasn't a disorder. It was a response, and it was a very appropriate response in the situation, because the person was in trauma. And it wasn't post for the people that we were working, was actually with a police force. Those people were not post the traumatic event. They were going back into it day after day after day because of the nature of their job. So we created a different terminology to use. But that is something that creates dis-ease in our body, which can then lead to what we would class as disease. So it can manifest then in the body. It can come out. Our traumas and our stresses can become physical symptoms. But those symptoms, again, they have a purpose. They are trying to tell us something. They're communication.
Don't I know it?
Yeah, when
exactly
we can learn.
Yes.
When we can learn how to interpret, decode, unpack, unpick those messages that our body is sending us, because the only way it has to talk to us is through how we feel. And then when we understand what it's saying, then we can start to put things in place to support ourselves.
A big part of when I talk about my own story, and obviously on some future occasion in podcasts, we'll probably talk a little bit more in detail about my background and also about your background. But the nutshell version of this is the fact is that something which is extremely, this dis-ease, as you call it. I've never asked you this question before, is very relevant in relation to what I have said has happened to me and what I talk to other people to try and get them to understand and recognize, so they don't have to go down that same path necessarily, or they don't have to go down it quite so severely, should we say, is this disease, this idea of this feeling of being unwell, this feeling of trepidation, this feeling of fear, this feeling of things not being right. And before
sometimes I just talk about being off. Things just are a little bit off, and we can't put a finger necessarily on how.
Well, when it all happened for me, it manifested itself as this dislocation, this dissociation, where I was almost like a second behind myself, watching myself live my life type thing. And this is such a horrible, confusing sort of state to be in for a period of time. That was evident. That was something that you could look at in me and say, this is what's happened to him. There was almost like this point, right? There was this point where this dis-ease, as you call it, had turned into this moment in time where there was panic attacks and where there was this physical deterioration, which is basically my brain telling me to rest, my brain telling me that that's enough.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that at the time. So it's really interesting when you say about this dis-ease. This is that, what I call the hunger. Like when you try to give up smoking, or whether you haven't had anything to eat for hours, or whether you haven't had enough sleep or something like that, you know? And interestingly enough, and as I say, I swear I've never asked you this question before, you have just described in one word exactly how I felt before it all fell apart. And it's not a feeling, I'm still prone to it little bits now and again, but I know what to do now. But my ignorance was so enormous that I had no idea what was actually going to happen, which is just as well most of the time. We don't know what's around the corner, but in this particular occasion, it would have been really helpful. And you've just described in that one word exactly how I felt.
And this is the thing, there isn't anything mainstream out there that says, if you're feeling like this, it's a message from your body. It's trying to tell you something. Let's sit down and explore that before you get to the point of severe illness.
Yeah.
Whether that's a psychological illness or an emotional illness or a physical illness or a combination of all of the above. For people to know that, it's, I guess, where it links in with messy is that these feelings, we sometimes think they're too messy, I can't deal with them. So we push them down, we suppress them. And sometimes we do that by self-medicating. And we can do that in all sorts of ways. It can be smoking, it can be drinking, it can be drugs, it can be shopping. There's a whole raft of things that we do.
Overeating is a big one.
Yes, yeah, or not eating, as we were talking about earlier as well.
Yeah.
Over-exercising. Unfortunately, some of the things that we think of as healthy can actually be twisted and become unhealthy. And it's a way of kind of, I don't want to feel this messiness. I don't want to feel this discomfort and this dis-ease. So I'll do other things that temporarily stop me feeling it. But they're only temporary. And our threshold of need goes up and up and up. So where you might start with one painkiller, if the pain doesn't go away, then you might need two, and then you might need to take two more often, and you might need to combine one set of pills with another set of pills. And then you might get all sorts of other side effects and complications. So if we could just get to the point where we can say, my life is feeling a little bit uncomfortable right now. It's feeling a little bit messy. I'm going to explore this. I'm going to sit down and listen to what my body is saying rather than distract myself, self-medicate or whatever, or rather than just push it all down until disease comes out. It's like they say, if you don't take time for your well-being, you're going to have to make time for your being ill. at some point in your life.
Substantially more as well, because again, another presentation I've done is what I call the Wellbeing sausage machine. And I talk about how if you put £1 worth of product in this end, right, and I just actually show them on the screen and say, you've got this, 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 and this. And then you go through a process, and the process is literally putting the skin on the outside of it. It comes out the other end, and it's now worth £3. So you've increased its value by 300%, right?
Yeah.
But the analogy in relation to that is the cost in relation to people's well-being. And there's organizations who do not or will not, and I can understand sometimes why not, because they're short of money or it's difficult trading or whatever. They will not invest that £1 in the well-being of their staff to prevent £3 worth of damage, because the process is not the creating of these lovely sausages. The process is this damage which is done to produce this thing at the other end. Yeah. So exactly what you just said is true. You say about prevention and preempting things are not always, but normally much cheaper than dealing with the consequences, dealing with the fallout.
And easier and quicker.
Yeah, normally, yeah. I mean, why do they not retrofit things to houses a year after they're built? Because it's easier to do it when you build the house.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds like a simplistic analogy, but that's actually the way it works, because you're talking about people who it's not just the bottom line. It's not just the fact it's going to cost that company or that organization or those people more money or more time. You're talking about human beings. You're talking about the most important by far is the fact is that you're leaving that person like almost hung out to dry. You're actually not doing within the confines, within the logic of what you can actually do, that what's available. You're not actually making the effort to do that. So the real cost is in relation to that person's life, in relation to that person's well-being. The things that we're doing here now, right? We're talking about things, putting things in place, hopefully before these big events happen. Even after the big events, even though we're not talking about here as doctors, and I emphasized last time, we're not healers, we're not doctors. We're here for the purpose of trying to give people practical, mainly based upon our own real life experiences. We're here to give them practical information to try and prevent them from going down that wrong path.
And also just to start the conversation, just to start.
Yeah.
Kind of sometimes it's almost like giving permission. It's okay to talk about this stuff. It's okay to ask these questions. It's okay to say.
Yeah. Like insurance. People have insurance sometimes because it's a legal requirement regarding vehicles and stuff like that. But mostly people have insurance for one reason, because they never ever want to use it.
Yeah.
We're talking about well-being insurance here. We're talking about understanding or being able to give someone practical information and say, do you feel like this? Is this what this feels like to you? I'm not guaranteeing this is the situation, because there are no guarantees. This is what I felt like. This is what happened to me. And I don't want you, and I don't mean ignorance as in willful ignorance. I mean sort of blissful ignorance, if you like. I don't want you to be in that same area of ignorance that I was in. I don't want you to be in a situation whereby all of a sudden it all comes crashing down around you and you think, what the hell was that? Where did that come from? Well, in actual fact, it's been creeping up on you for months. It hasn't just arrived. Yeah?
Yeah, and I think this is where messy kind of comes in a sense, because if we are not comfortable with being uncomfortable, if we're not comfortable with looking at the uncomfortable emotions and the discomfort that is within and the trauma that we have experienced, and we live in a traumatized society. Gabor Mate's just written a great book that, well, not just, it's been out a while now, but it's his most recent book, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness and Healing in a Toxic Culture. And he talks about how we're living just in a toxic soup, a soup of trauma that we're not even aware of, because it starts from when we are so small. Trauma can be very, very simple very simple for it to happen. It doesn't take a big thing. And unfortunately, when there are so many parents who are stressed, parents, particularly now with the cost of living, if they're really concerned about that, they don't have enough money coming into the household, they're worried about that. So they're a worried, depressed parent, and a worried, depressed parent creates anxious children. And also there's a lot of parents out there now, and I'm not pointing fingers of blame at anybody, but the easy thing, and we are always looking for the easy thing as human beings, is to give the phone or the device, the tablet, to the child. And parents are even doing this so that the child stays still when they're having their nappy changed. So that generation is literally growing up nearly hip joined to these devices.
Yeah.
But then they're not having the interaction with the parent. The parent isn't having to negotiate and find ways to keep the child engaged so that they stay still. And I know that there's a lot going on, and there's reasons why parents feel that they have to do that. But it's creating issues for the future. And our school system doesn't teach the things that I wish it would teach. Being conscious, listening to your body, how to meditate, how to be mindful. There are some schools that are starting to teach that now, and they're finding it makes a difference. But if we are not comfortable with being uncomfortable, and we just know, if we just have this belief, pain is bad and we have to push down pain, get rid of pain, we're not going to start exploring these things because they're painful, they're uncomfortable, and that's why we push them down. But it's like the medication that we then have to take another medication because of the side effects of the first one, and then the combination creates other side effects. So we just keep medicating versus, well, if I'd drunk a cup of water in the first place, my headache would have gone away. I wouldn't have needed the painkiller. So I think there needs to be a whole shift in how we look at our symptoms and being able to see them as information, being able to see the discomfort as information, valuable information that's going to tell us something about ourselves and help us to keep well, actually, even though we feel that's a bit counterintuitive. But there's a great quote by A.H. Almaas, and I'm not going to be able to remember it. But basically, he's saying that the pain and the discomfort we feel is ours. It is unique to the individual, and it's there coming from the part of you that loves you most, because it's the only vocabulary it has. It's the only way it has to say, please pay attention. This is not serving you. You will be better going in a different way.
Do we have to have information and education that goes with that intuition? Because I'm just thinking now about, I wasn't listening to, well, I didn't have the language, I didn't have the understanding to listen to what my body was telling me. I didn't know. It was almost like, I mean, choose any language I don't speak, choose Arabic, choose Dutch, choose whatever. I didn't have the equipment to understand, because nobody had told me. This is why we're sitting here now, right? This is why we're making this effort, is to try and give people that bit of really straightforward, simple information that could be the key to them not suffering in silence. Because this goes back to the messy theme again now, right? About people just thinking, this is bad, this is awful, what the hell is it? You know,
and it's my fault. I should be this perfect picture. We have such unrealistic expectations of ourselves and of what life is going to be like, rather than just, life is an adventure, life is an exploration. It's not a test. It's not a competition. Yes, we have a finite length of time in this life, depending on whether you believe that you come back or not. It's how to enjoy that. And I always think that our purpose is just to be as me as I can be for every single individual. That we have unique gifts to bring. And it's only by stepping into the me that I am here to be that those unique gifts are going to come out. And that I'm going to bring how I see the world to the world through my eyes that are different from anybody else's. So adding to the color and the flavor and all of the other things that we talked about before. That can look very messy as well. And if you think of an organization, when they're struggling to do that well-being stuff, and even there's a whole lot of legislation and stuff that people have to follow. And here in Wales, we've got a lot now against anti-racism and homophobia and all of that stuff that they're trying to bring in. But then I often hate it when people talk about their rights, because whose rights trump anybody else's rights?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a right as, say, a disabled person to have a ramp. But then somebody else has a right, and some people, ramps don't work for them. They need steps. Steps are what work for them. Ramps don't work for them. And then, well, who wins? How do we find a way? And I think because in our culture we've become so individualistic and so much about playing the trump cards, versus going back to, again, what we touched on last time, about living in the community, in the village, where we negotiated and we found the best way that we could. And if this is a thing as well with political correctness now, people are afraid to speak out because then they're going to be accused of saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing and being offensive and, you know, maybe being a racist or whatever. Whereas maybe they just didn't know. And then it causes people to shut down and get defensive, and then they don't learn. So they make the mistake again.
I tell you the bit that in relation to that, right? I mean, it's the step on from what you were just talking about. It's the next step. And I don't look at these things with rose-tinted glasses, because things weren't obviously perfect necessarily back in the last century, not in many, many ways. But however, if somebody years ago would had said something which somebody else found offensive, there seemed to be, and again, this goes back to this dis-ease and this messiness, really, this whole feeling of things not being right, and how do you make them right, or how do you accept them, not necessarily solve them, but accept them. And you would have if I said something to you as a woman, and you would say to me, or you would get somebody else to say to me, if you didn't want to do it yourself, another man or another woman, and you'd say, well, Robin was a little bit upset in relation to what you said about so-and-so. And I go, what? Oh, I didn't mean it that way. It's all right, I speak to her, or can you speak to her on my behalf? So there seemed to be more common sense in relation to how we cleared up the mess. Do you know? Because a lot of things these days, and this is not talking about whether these thoughts are right or wrong. This is talking about finding it's not even a solution. That's not what we were talking about. Finding a way to accommodate these things, which is sensible.
Yeah, and finding a way forward together.
Yeah.
Finding, and for me, it comes back to knowing that our humanity, our shared humanity, is bigger than our differences.
Yeah.
We have so much more in common than we have different. But being able to bring those together, and I watched the movie, I can't remember what it was called, but it was about trauma. And they brought in, after the movie, they had Wisdom of Trauma or something, I think it was called. After that, they had a lot of little other kind of aspects of that. And one of them was looking at, I think, the feminine and that whole situation of how the world has been very masculine, and it's been generally masculine led, and men have been generally the ones who wrote history, and how that has impacted on women. But also there was the situation for native peoples. So maybe the Maoris or the originals in Australia, or the Native Americans, and people from Africa who've been transported all over the world through history. And how do we resolve those things? Or myself coming from Ireland, or the situation with Israel, Palestine, or Ukraine, Russia. There is so much anger and hatred that's held. Where do we find a way? How do we find a way to address that and the historical stuff. And we're trying in some pockets, but it doesn't seem to be being as effective as one would like it to be. Because I know that we're never all going to agree. That's not the point. But it's where do we get to the point where the mutual respect and the having openness and having, Brene Brown talks about a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. And I've just started listening to her book, Dare to Lead. And she talks about daring bravely and daring greatly. And it's about that, having difficult conversations, being prepared to stand up and say, that hurt, or I'm sorry I've hurt you. How can we come together and talk about this and find a way through together where we both grow and we both learn and we both benefit? And it might not look like your way or my way, but we'll find a way to go forward.
Well, that comes back to we've come back to the M word again, right? We come back to messy. All these situations are very, very messy, right?
Yeah.
But are we in danger now of having a generation who don't understand conflict resolution? And when I say that, I don't want to open up like another hour's conversation in relation to what conflict or resolution is, but it's very, very relevant in relation to how do you sort out messy? How do you educate people? How do you get them to understand that things are exactly what you just said, right? We're not all going to agree. That's not necessarily a desirable state that we all agree anyway.
No.
You're going to have different opinions, and some of those opinions are generally accepted to be unacceptable by the majority of people. That's why we have laws, right? That's why we have laws which say you shouldn't denigrate someone to the point whereby you overstep the mark. You shouldn't have laws which are threatening. You shouldn't have laws which promote violence and stuff like that. The vast majority of people agree with those things. How do you sort out the stuff in the middle now, the messy, which is there and is supposedly acceptable messy? Do you know what I mean? They're not the stuff which is dealt with on this end or that end. The stuff in the middle. How are we in danger of having a generation who can't do this bit as well as maybe me and you and older people did?
I think it starts with the individual, because that's the only place that we as the individual have control. And I think it's like what Gandhi said, if you want to see peace in the world, start right here. We need to have that space of inner peace. And I think it's about that being comfortable, not necessarily fully comfortable, but comfortable-ish, prepared to sit in messy and discomfort. Because if we're not prepared to do that, we can't have those difficult conversations and we can't resolve them because we'll just get defensive. But in order to be able to do that, we have to be honest with ourselves about the trauma and the hurt and the pain that we're carrying. Because otherwise...
And maybe on occasions, maybe we're causing to other people without knowing it as well.
Yes, but I think it's being able to address our own and know that it's there, admit that it's there to ourselves, because otherwise we're going to be reactionary rather than responsive. And people are going to press those buttons and we're just going to blow.
Yeah.
And if we're comfortable with being uncomfortable, if the buttons get pressed, we can go, oh, hang on, I just need to go and look at this, because otherwise I'm going to blow. So when we feel stuff coming up, we can go, oh, that's my stuff. I need to address that first. I don't want to bring my stuff when you're also bringing your stuff. I read something years ago, which I loved. It really stuck with me, that when two people come together and they're having a conversation, it's not actually adult talking to adult. It's ego talking to ego, wound talking to wound. If you are pressing my buttons that I may not even be aware or conscious or admit to myself that I have, I'm going to throw that back at you. So that's going to hit your wounds, and then we're just going to escalate. But maybe we need to be more like the bouncer. The good bouncer is going in there to diffuse. They're not going in there to throw a match in and chuck people out. They're going in there to calm the situation, or yourself, I'm sure, as well, in your previous role as a police officer. That was what you were actually supposed to be doing. Yeah. Helping people.
Well, in most circumstances, yes.
Yeah. Helping people to diffuse in order to avoid the big clash and big explosion. Talking people down. And when people come down, when they feel safe, when they feel heard, that's when we can have those good conversations. They're challenging, but they're good because they bring stuff out and you can explore it and understand and start to be able to see, why did you say that? Why did you feel that? Why did you think that way? Oh, that's why. Okay, how can we help you with that? How can we support you where you're not feeling supported, where you're feeling sensitive and vulnerable and exposed and hurt and angry and fearful? For me, on the other side as well.
Let's have a little summing up here now then. Give me your definition. I don't, this is a bit unfair, me actually doing this, I suppose, but just see if you can give me a definition of messy then, as we've discussed it now.
There are so many different levels, but I think in terms of the dis-ease, messy is any discomfort that we feel. It's those things that make us really uncomfortable, cringy, and that we don't want to look at. We want to cover up. We don't want other people to see because it leaves us feeling vulnerable. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, that'll do. That's just about it, really. I was just like intrigued from the first place in relation to you brought this subject up. And I was obviously wrong about you not being a messy person. So I apologize for that bit. Or at least externally, you appeared to be a very unmessy person.
But as I said to you before, that the tidy desk is the sign of the untidy mind.
Yeah.
And I think it can be, like with the other things we talked about, that control, or that I need to feel like my environment is not messy and that I know where things are, because inside it feels like everything is just up in the air or falling apart or whatever. Yeah, I think sometimes it's a coping strategy in a sense. And if it works for you, great. But if it's just keeping things only just hanging in there, and you're like, I used to be an absolute control freak, and you had a script the last time we were here and we were talking.
I didn't stick to it, but yeah, we did.
No. But when some people feel I must go through each thing one at a time, and I used to be like that. Whereas now I might write all my notes and then go, okay, let's just have a conversation. So I start from the point.
But I start from the point of view, Robin, of intending to stick to the script, right? It never happens, you know.
Best laid plans of mice and men.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you very much. That's your contribution to this particular session. Very, very interesting, because as I said in the beginning, I didn't know what you were going to say. And that's the way we're going to be carrying on with these things now, in as much as I want to be part of the audience. I want you to be part of the audience when I bring something or you bring something. And talking about bringing something, you will find that either, and we had this problem last time, either on this particular streaming thing, either up there or more likely down there, you will find that you're able to make comments, ask questions, put opinions forward. Please do if you want to, because we're both, as long as there's no expletives, right? And you're not sort of, say anything really, really rude. We're really interested in relation to what you want to tell us. This is not about me and Robin having all the answers, because we haven't got them. This is about our thoughts, our feelings, our opinions. And if you want to get involved, please do make your thoughts known. And we'll be back with session number 3 in the not too distant future. So from me, I'll say my bit first. Thank you very much for listening. I found it very interesting. And thank you for Robin for putting her subject forward. And
just to add, If you want to make it a controversial comment, we're very happy. We like controversial, something that's thought-provoking, and we want this to be a conversation, don't we? And we want it just to be like meeting in a coffee shop and having a chat and having a conversation. And we've talked today about having difficult conversations and how those can be messy. As long as it's kept constructive, we're very happy to have that. And we mentioned in the last podcast, and just to say again, that if there's anything you want to raise, but you don't want to do it publicly, feel free to message directly to myself or Nigel. We're very happy to have that as well.
Okay. And you will actually see our email addresses coming up after we've just stopped talking now at the end of this film. And we'll be back with number 3 in the reasonably near future, I believe. Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here. From myself, really interested, enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.